What intrigued your curiosity?
There used to be a show, ESPN Sports Science.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
And I thought that was the coolest thing as a kid.
Gatorade Sports Science Institute. How did it happen?
Yeah, it was not the route I thought I was going to go at all.
If you go to industry, you're joining the dark side, right?
That was the exact battle I was going through.
And it's not so much that they're even good or bad people, it's just, are they the right person for what you're trying to accomplish?
Where a family can be good, but it can also be very toxic.
At GSSI, they're very much like.
Welcome back to another episode of Physiology Unraveled, the Career Series. I am your host, Jorge Granados, and today my co-host, Dr. Joe Watso, and I are joined by Dr. Philip Agostinelli. His scientific journey began at Slippery Rock University and ultimately led him to earn his PhD in kinesiology at Auburn. Along the way, he has worked in neuromuscular research, human performance, and now he finds himself working for the GSSI, better known as the Gatorade Sports Science Institute. He works for their satellite laboratory at IMG Academy in Bradenton, Florida, where he conducts research and performance testing on thousands of athletes and occupational workers. In this episode, we explore Phil's journey as we continue to unravel careers in physiology and the biomedical sciences. All right, and welcome to the podcast, Phil. Thanks for being here with us today on a Saturday afternoon. So, we would like to just begin by you telling us, who you are, a little bit about your your path onto getting into your current role with the Gatorade Sports Science Institute, and then we'll ask you some more questions as we go through there. So, take it away.
Yeah, so my name's Phil Agostinelli, and I am a senior scientist for the Gatorade Sports Science Institute down in our satellite laboratory in Bradenton, Florida. My path to this role, I am born and raised in just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Spent 24 years of my life there, went to a small undergrad university called Slippery Rock University. I always like to clarify it's a real place. It's a real town called Slippery Rock. But did an undergrad in exercise science there. Went to the University of Pittsburgh for my master's. That's when I really found my, interest in research, and I worked in a military research lab called the Neuromuscular Research Lab under Dr. Brad Nindle. Worked there for a little over a year, and then pursued my PhD at Auburn University in a lab called the Warrior Research Center, where we did some military and firefighter research. After 4 years there, I decided I'd keep moving south and applied to the Gatorade Sports Science Institute and got the job. And my role down there is predominantly research-based, looking at studies centered around hydration and performance for youth athletes on IMG Academy's campus, as well as some work outside of the Florida campus, where we do warehouse and manufacturing worker research, looking at heat stress, and ergonomic performance in occupational workers.
Wow, that's one. I'm jealous of your role. That sounds really fun. And two, there's a lot of questions that I have regarding, the youth sports, the research that you guys are doing, and even the occupational stuff that you guys are doing. It sounds really interesting. But I want to take it back to the beginning. You said that during your master's, that's whenever you found that passion. What was it? Was there a certain project or certain question? What intrigued your curiosity?
Yeah. So I'll actually pull it back a little bit further and so that we can connect all the dots. But when I was a kid, I don't know if either of you remember, there used to be a show, ESPN Sports Science.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And I thought that was the coolest thing as a kid. They bring on Ray Lewis and they test his tackling strength and they compare it to like a rhino, or they talk about the strike force of a boxer and compare it to that of like a snake. And they kind of like broke down the science of performance and sport. And that's really whenever I first saw an interest in that area. And my sister, she was a exercise physiologist. She actually got me my first gym membership, was my first personal trainer when I was playing sports growing up. So that kind of led me to this idea of, oh, I'm going to be a personal trainer, strength coach. And I was like, yeah, this is going to be great. And then I realized how tough personal training and strength and conditioning careers are from a financial perspective or from a, work-life balance perspective. So I was like, I think I got to do more. So I went and did the master's. I had some, professors along the way that were just really inspiring, that led me to this idea of, hey, maybe I'll become a professor. I want to have the impact that they had on, the next generation of exercise physiologists. And whenever I went to Pittsburgh, one of my undergrad professors was like, hey, you should check out this neuromuscular research laboratory. They do military research, and I think you'd really enjoy it. So I, sent an email, asked if I could volunteer. And right away I got involved with a really, really cool project. And that's really where it all sparked of like, oh, research is pretty cool. We were looking at essentially this idea of cognitive resiliency, and we took military personnel that were, active members of the military, but not, on duty at the point. They'd fly into Pittsburgh, or, if they were local, they'd come up, and for 5 days they'd be, at our facility. And they would be sleep deprived, calorically restricted, physically exerted, and then tested in every facet we could think of. We did muscle biopsies. We were doing transcranial magnetic stimulation to see central versus peripheral fatigue. We were doing cognitive assessments to see decision making and reaction time. And we were seeing how, I believe it was 3 days of that restriction, how that impacted their performance, and if there were any, markers that could differentiate those who can, sustain their performance versus not. And I fell in love immediately after that. So that was that spark for me.
That was really cool. Thank you for sharing that. And out of curiosity, I guess for those that are listening, what did you guys find? What was
I ended up leaving the team before the study was finished. It was a very long study. It took multiple years to complete that protocol. But I do think they recently published, maybe in 2024, the results from it. So if you look up Dr. Brad Nindle, it should be on his Google Scholar page. But
gotcha.
Yeah, I never got to see the outcomes, but it was really cool.
That is one of the things that a lot of people don't realize, right? That if you're not involved in research or in human research, you might not realize how long it takes to collect this kind, especially with, like you're saying, your war fighters, your military takes so long to do that. So that's I would say one of the downsides of doing this type of research. And so now your transition into Gatorade Sports Science Institute, I have not to make this, because I know that this is your story to share, but when I was doing my undergrad, I actually remember going into a class. It was exercise physiology class, undergrad, and somebody was running in the treadmill, and the professor was teaching the class, but somebody was collecting data basically off on the side. Somebody's running on the treadmill, and they have the VO2 mask on. I had no idea, right? There's just a bunch of tubes and wires and everything going on, and they would stop and they draw blood and they get back on and it just reminded me of the Gatorade commercials back in the old day, where you have somebody running and you can see the sweat in different color Gatorade, right? And as kind of as you're saying your story, it reminded me of that. I was like, oh, that's what I want to do. So I actually started volunteering and ended up doing a PhD after that. So
that's awesome.
So to that, what drove you into going into, I guess, Gatorade Sports Science Institute? Did you always know that was the route that you wanted to go to, or How did it happen? Walk us through that.
Yeah, it was not the route I thought I was going to go at all. And it's really funny because I only, more recently connected the dots of how much that ESPN Sports Science show sparked my interest in this field.
Mm-hmm.
Once I started in this role, and I was like, I think I'm kind of doing this. Like this is my job now. Like I'm not on a TV show, but like I'm actually doing this applied sports science work. That was what sparked the initial interest. But whenever I was going through and, got into my PhD, by that point, I had this perspective that I was going to be a university professor and have a balance of teaching and research, and like that was my goal. I had no ifs and buts, plan B's, nothing. I was like, that's where I'm going.
Yeah.
But something I started to realize is I've always loved the really applied work, the performance work. And what I started to realize as I was like applying and trying to look at my next step, I was starting to realize that, academia favors a little bit more basic science and wet lab science that is like super valuable, but by no means am I bashing that. But I realized like it's a little bit harder from a funding perspective, from a job interview perspective to like show that value from a performance side. Um, and again, still wasn't thinking I was going industry though. I applied to 35 jobs. Gatorade was the 35th.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I had some that, it worked out and they offered me a position, but it didn't feel right. So I turned it down. Or there were ones that, I wasn't selected. There were some that, 6 months ago I was just hearing back from. And that was almost 2 years after I was applying. So it was like all over the place. I was applying everywhere. For a little context, my girlfriend, her and I have been together like 8 years. She was in Dallas, Texas, working for Baylor Scott and White as a inpatient acute care physical therapist. So my idea was I'm trying to get out to Texas. I want to, do this type of research in the occupational world, but I want to do it in Texas. I want to be um, with her. And so eventually this position at GSSI pops up. One of my friends sends me the posting, and it's actually for their Frisco lab, which they have a lab right outside of Dallas in Frisco, Texas. And I submit my application. And even whenever I submitted the application, I remember talking to my friends and being like, I don't know, this was never my plan. This wasn't my path. Like I'm committed to this idea of, academia, but, let me just put it out there. And I started to go on the GSSI webpage, and I was like, wow, wait, this is kind of cool. Like for an industry, company, right? Like a entity, I should say, there's a lot of research here. There's a lot of engagement with the academic world. There's a lot of really cool, opportunity that I could see myself kind of fitting into. So I got on an initial, interview with a recruiter actually, and pretty much right away they were like, "Hey, we think you'd be a much better fit for our Florida lab. Would you be okay if we move your application over to there?" And I was like,
Wow.
it's like, yeah,
Girlfriend's
sure.
gonna be
And
mad.
I like hang up and I call my girlfriend. I'm like, hey, what do you think about Florida? And she was super supportive. She's like, I think I can do Florida. It's still warm.
Okay.
She just doesn't want to go back up north. But so I apply, and immediately my supervisor at the Florida lab, Chris Osterberg, her and I have a one-on-one meeting, and um, I knew right away that like that's the type of person I wanted to work for. And something that, I learned along the way was the value and importance of a good mentor. So that was a huge, you know, perspective shift once I had that conversation with her of like, this is a place I think I could, learn and grow and develop under her supervision, right? So I made the jump, and during that decision making process, what I really, boiled it down to was like, do I have to do what exactly what I said I was planning to do and go academia, go research here, or can I answer the same, you know, goal and pursue the same path,
Hmm.
just with it looking a little different, right? And um, I talked a lot with friends. I really boiled it down to like what I enjoy most is like providing a service to people and
Yeah.
being a mentor and a um like a leader to people. And I was like, I can do that anywhere. I don't have to be, at a university
Yeah.
with a lab and students. So let me just,
Hmm.
take this step and see what it's like, and I don't have to, pigeonhole myself to it. Now that I'm here, I'm glad I made that jump, and I don't hope to ever leave really. But
Yeah.
um yeah, so that's a really long-winded way of kind of how I ended up there, I feel like.
No, that's great. I've got one last question, and then I'll hand it over to Joe. Sorry, Joe, hijacking the podcast on here. So, as you were talking about that, you talked to friends and you felt like, oh, I was thinking about going into academia. That was my whole goal. I felt the exact same way when I decided to start looking outside of academia for various reasons. But for me, I just remember lots of different feelings. Uh, Feeling of failure if I don't
Yep.
stick to
Yeah.
the academia route. Feeling of even kind of being a traitor. I mean, we kind of joke of like,
Hmm.
oh, you're joining, if you go to industry, you're joining the dark side, right?
Yeah.
And it's almost kind of like, am I giving up on this
Yeah.
dream? So I don't know. Are those some of the feelings? Does that sound similar?
100%. That was the
Okay.
exact battle I was going through of like,
Yeah.
there's a very common theme of like, industry and corporate like research is,
Hmm.
not trustworthy, or it's the dark side, like we just joked on. But
Yeah.
I definitely felt that, whenever I would talk about, oh, I'm going to apply to this position now.
Hmm.
Like you could see that some, especially some of the older faculty, or like,
Hmm.
um, some of the more old school minded individuals that I would like walk through this process. Are you sure you want to go into industry? Then I'd be like, I mean, I don't know. I don't know, but I
Yeah.
don't know what it's like. I've
Hmm.
never had that exposure. I do know what academia is like, and I have my love to hate relationship on that side,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's like, why don't I, see what's out there? And I had a lot of really
Hmm.
good mentors as well that kind of supported that idea of like, hey, industry, there are a lot of pros and
Yeah.
benefits to industry. I'm sure you can attest to it too. But something I've started to learn about that I enjoy is, the translation, the application that is so direct, right?
Hmm.
Like, in research and in academia, you have to be like pretty self-assured as well, because you might never see the real benefits of your work, because it becomes like a paper, and
Yeah.
eventually it gets cited and gets passed along and can make a huge impact. But um in my time at GSSI, we get to do service testing, we get to do research that leads to direct products and
Yeah.
claims, and you kind of see you get a little bit more immediate gratification. So
Yeah.
sometimes I find that pretty motivating from a work standpoint. So
Just a little bit faster rewarding. Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting. But to your point, I struggled back and forth with that idea a lot. And I actually talked to one of my close, family members that had worked in corporate America for a long time, and was like, I was like, I don't know about industry. These are kind of my concerns. And he's like, I've worked in this area for a long time, and he just kind of emphasized that translation, that impact, like, and the opportunity to kind of have a little bit more immediate security and work life balance, where I was like, maybe it's time to give this a try for a short time. Yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. And I guess those are some good things to anybody that's thinking about that right now. They're struggling with that, right? Look at the pros and the cons. And obviously, there's a lot of pros to staying in academia, pursuing that route, of course. So Joe can attest to some of those. And
Yeah.
industry, like you said, pros and cons as well. So,
Yep.
but Joe, I'll let you follow up on any of those thoughts. I know it's been a lot.
Yeah, it's been great dialogue. Really nice to listen to. I wanted to circle back to something you talked about, and of course, you don't have to share specific companies or names or anything, but it's not too often that people talk about the offers that they receive for jobs, but then actually decline. So to me, that says a lot about being thoughtful of not just applying for a job and taking the first one, but sort of really getting a sense for
Yeah.
what I'm going to do in that role, who I'm going to work with. And it's
Yeah.
not so much that they're even good or bad people. It's just, are they the right
Right.
person for what you're trying to accomplish? So I don't know if you could share more a little bit about that and sort of your decision
Yeah.
making and all that.
Yeah. That was one of the hardest and like probably most nerve-wracking experiences. So for a little background, I had actually done my PhD a little less conventionally as well, where in my third year, I had done my dissertation and finished it before the end of my third year. So I was actually trying to graduate early. So I started applying to jobs, and I had got an offer for a postdoc, and I think it would have been a great lab. And I think I could have done and learned a lot of valuable, skills had I taken that postdoc. Um, I think it was a great opportunity. But when I sat back, I was like, am I just doing this because it's an opportunity and, I have that chance? Or is this really where I want to be and what I want to do? And when I started to look at it, it was a little like, it was kind of adjacent to my uh career goals. So it was like similar, but not quite aligned, where I was like, yeah, I could. And I constantly felt myself kind of justifying it rather than like being excited about that opportunity, being like, well, it's not this, but that's fine. Um, and I sat again. It always comes back to like my very close group of friends, the mentors I had, Austin being one of them, Austin Robinson, our mutual connection, but a lot of people I would sit with, talk to, get career advice on. And what I ended up doing was sitting back and taking my fourth year of my PhD and, writing papers, doing fun projects that were not my dissertation, um, and being able to actually dedicate more time to the job market and determining what I wanted to do after my PhD. And so then I, started applying to more positions. By that point, after taking another 6 to 9 months before applying again, I realized I had a better idea of what I wanted to do and where I wanted to be. And I knew at that point it was still applied performance, some tie to heat stress, right? And that really helped me narrow in. That's when, I started looking at other postdoc opportunities and in the occupational heat stress space, or heat stress in general. And then I also kind of looked at, my non-career goals and what I wanted to do from a personal perspective. And my girlfriend and I had done distance for 4 years continuously. So, not only did I want to be in the same location, but I wanted something that was, more permanent too. Like, so when that industry position came up, I was like, well, it's not a postdoc where I'm guaranteed 1 year and, trying to fend off for 3 years, like find funding for 3 years, or, and potentially moving again, and then hoping that the next, you know, assistant professor job is where I want to stay long term, right? Versus I was able to, kind of settle into a permanent position here. So I really valued the the nervousness that I steered into, because it would have been very easy to like give in to that nervousness and go, okay, yeah, I'm just going to take this job. It's a job. I'm going to make more than my PhD, and I'm going to do cool things still. And it might not be perfect, but it's fine. Like, let's just do it. And instead I was like, no, we're going to sit with this discomfort. We're going to pull back and, actually make sure that we set ourselves up long-term rather than short-term. And, that would be something I encourage people all the time when I talk now from a career perspective. It's just, don't be afraid to say no. Like, I feel like, especially coming out of your PhD, you're just like, please, someone give me a job. I'm, I make so little money. I have so little time. I just want something, right? And it's like, no, like, make sure that those 10 years of extra schooling are worth something, right? And it leads you to where you want to be.
Yeah, that's a great adage to follow. One thing that you brought up was the skills, and I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about any of the transferable skills that you brought from the PhD into your role, and any skills that you feel like you've picked up over the couple of years that you've been with GSSI, and any sort of thoughts you have about that.
Yeah, that is a good question. I think some of the most translatable skills that helped kind of get me to my role, I remember, my supervisor talking about this. But she really valued the amount of field research I had done. When you're working military and firefighter type research studies, you're usually out in the field gathering data, in that applied setting. And that's what GSSI IMG is all about. So, for a little context, GSSI IMG is the research lab on IMG Academy's sports campus. So there's 9, I think, different sports on IMG Academy's campus, and GSSI, one of our roles on campus is to do research with these athletes and provide hydration, sports nutrition, and performance outcomes that can guide the youth athlete. And a lot of our research, we go out to the practices. We go out and collect data right there on the field with them. We do have them come into the lab for studies and do things in-house in a more controlled fashion. But I think that was one of the biggest skill sets that that they noted was my experience in field research from like a technical side. From a more, character side, I would say adaptability was one of my biggest characteristics that, in industry and is always talked about, but especially with PepsiCo and Gatorade, they very frequently require you to be extremely adaptable because priorities change, the market changes, and you have to be very agile to understand the business relationship while still pursuing the important research questions that apply to the consumer and to the athlete. So I think while I hadn't had a good understanding of like the corporate side or the business side of things, my agility from a career standpoint, from a research standpoint, I think was a huge skill set because I, throughout my PhD, had a wide variety of experiences and studies that I was a part of. And I was kind of constantly, shifting perspectives based on the current, needs of the team I was on at that time, rather than, kind of doing one thing really well all the time. It was like, okay, time to adapt, kind of learn a new skill set and do it quick, right? So I think that's something that served me well, and a skill that was valued whenever I was interviewing was just the breadth of skills rather than the depth of skill, which applies really well to a performance-based, institute like GSSI.
Yeah, when you're talking about all that, it makes me wonder how much of that overlaps you think with just optimism and interest in just trying to get better, because you've talked about some of those things: leadership, motivating service. So it sounds like those things sort of intermingle where it sounds like you need to sort of be up for anything. I don't know if you have more thoughts on that.
Yeah, to a certain degree. I think you have to find the positive spin on things. And I think that serves you well in any setting. Um, because I've learned that, like, if you're always poking holes in things, you can very easily get frustrated with the adaptability, the change, the lack of maybe direct focus. But whenever you have this, optimism of like, hey, I have this opportunity, and maybe it's not what I thought it would be, maybe it's not where I thought it was going to take me, but let me make the most of it. I think it helps you kind of roll with the punches or the waves a little bit easier, right? Um, and yeah, I think, in my experience in my PhD, I got a lot of exposure with the shift in perspectives and ever changing demands. So it kind of set me up well for the corporate side of things.
Yeah, the grant funding structure in academia definitely has you ready to change quickly depending
Yeah,
on what gets funded.
yeah.
Uh, and in those skills and being able to adapt and jump to those new challenges,
Mhm.
it makes me think about the things that this is the question I always ask. How you're rated as far as your performance indicators in your role, because it sounds like it could be that you're tasked with doing something and working on a project, then that moves forward, then all of a sudden 6 months later say, oh, actually no, we really need you to jump in here. And if you can kind of talk about what things stay the same with your role and what things sort of change the way of how you're evaluated and how you're able to sort of advance yourself in the role.
Yeah, yeah. So that's actually a super valuable question, because I didn't really understand that, when I was going into this next step. Like, in academia, it's a little bit more clear what the tenure track looks like. And, I get to GSSI, and our first year we do um, essentially an annual objective setting with our managers. And we write out our objectives with our manager. So we have a conversation about, okay, what are our goals, how does this align with the business needs, and the senior leaders interests and stuff. So the nice thing is you're a part of that conversation of what you're going to be evaluated on. So in the beginning of the year here, I'll be having that conversation for what 2026 looks like for me. And it's very much a conversation. My supervisor is amazing. She is probably the most supportive person I've met, where she's constantly helping me um, find things that are valuable and meaningful to me, as well as the company and our team down at IMG. And so then the nice thing is, from an adaptability standpoint, is in July we reevaluate those objectives before they get kind of set in stone for the year. So in July you have the chance of like, okay, did that study that was your number one objective for the year get canned because that's not a priority right now? It's like, okay, let's shift that, let's change that, and what can we prioritize before the end of the year? Or did recruitment end up being a lot harder than you expected, and this study's going to take till mid next year? Do we want to reevaluate you saying you're going to be done by December? So you have like a halfway checkpoint to say, hey, um, how have things changed? How do we make sure you're still set up for success? And then at the end of the year, um, you kind of go through and walk through what you accomplished with your objectives, where you did extra, where you did not meet an expectation, and you kind of talk through things and then plan for the following year. Um, and then your manager takes a lot of those outcomes and objectives and shares that kind of up the chain to the senior leaders, and that goes into these people planning meetings where they kind of decide, okay, what are the next steps, how is this going to go, and where can we see this person developing in the future.
Yeah, that's helpful to get a sort of broader understanding.
Yeah.
Before heading it over to Jorge, one follow-up question with that. Before the episode, we were talking a little bit about the internal and external knowledge. So for
Yeah.
external, you alluded to this with academia. It's very simple. You publish, it's out there, everybody could view it. In industry, you may have some things like that. You may have some talks, lectures that are public facing, and some things that are sort of that stay within the company. So can you talk about, I guess, that broadly, and then
Yeah.
also the challenges or how you've adapted to sort of narrating those things as far as knowing what is it like, I guess, to manage some of that specialized
Yeah.
information where you're on the field testing something new, and then you have to go home and sort of pretend like it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that is a new perspective for me for sure. One thing I really like about GSSI and PepsiCo as a whole, and what kind of helped me in my determination of like, can I do this industry thing, was they have a standard and obligation that you externally publish the work that we do. So like every research study I do have to, end up submitting that in some fashion externally, and share that, so that there isn't this, oh, we found results we didn't like, let's just tuck that away for, like, we don't do that, which is a breath of fresh air, because that would be, morally difficult for me. So I align really well with my organization on that front. What I will say is, like, whenever you have things that are like sensitive to, a product launch, or, a new development, and you have that information, but for the sake of the company's success, you can't actually share that. That's a new concept for me. I think I, naturally am somebody who is probably overly transparent. My manager would tell you that too. But just learning what you can and cannot say is its own skill set. And you kind of find a balance of like, okay, what can I tell you? What is that threshold? Luckily, we have some senior employees here that, have put together, some trainings and tutorials on like, hey, how do you navigate those types of conversations? Whether it's like, oh, what is your, current daily work look like? And I'm like, oh, well, I'm working on something that, is hopefully going to be a product launch, but I can't really tell you, what exactly that is, right? Or maybe get into specifics, but I can tell you, our goal is to see, can we improve in this area of like sustained hydration, or, can we do rapid rehydration like Gator Light is, and I can kind of paint the broad strokes, kind of like you were even saying, of just like give the overview and just not go into the details.
So, Phil, I want to touch on a couple of things that when I was applying into uh, different roles out of academia, and even into a postdoc, you mentioned a couple of times already that your supervisor, your mentor, it's a great mentor, right? So that perhaps maybe I had gotten lucky in through my career that I had really good mentors, and I was very fortunate and lucky with that. But I've, throughout some of my jobs, I've also had some not so great mentors or supervisors. And so can you talk about some of the other, I guess, things that whoever's applying into one of these roles, or they're getting ready, to graduate, and what things should they be looking outside of, yeah, just give me a job, give me money? Because I know you also mentioned about your values and your morals having to be aligned, and that was a kind of breath of fresh air, right? So any other things that you can think of, or anything that took you by surprise that you're like, oh, I didn't know I was going to value this so much?
Yeah. And I think that's such a good point. Like, because it's so hard to evaluate in an interview, like a structured, maybe 30-60 minute interview. Like, can I see myself working an entire career at this place?
Yep.
Right. And what I've always really tried to value is like, again, for me, I've always loved research in a very broad sense, where I can be pretty energized by a wide range of topics, right? Like, it could be athletes, it could be occupational workers, it could be heat stress, it could be hydration. Um, so whenever I was going through interviews, it was less about the exact work I was doing or the exact day-to-day responsibilities or questions we were trying to answer, and more about like, who am I going to be working with? Who am I going to be working for? What is their goal? What are their values? And how does that align with mine? And do these broader skills help me in my development rather than, is this the exact question, like the exact research interest that I, planned on doing. So I remember in my interview sitting and talking to my now manager, and it was an extremely conversational interview. Um, she was very transparent, um, and so was I. And very quickly, I knew that things were a little bit different. Like, so there was a um, a specific example where I was applying to this job at GSSI while I was still in my PhD. So it was around December or November that I was applying for this role, and I would be graduating in May. And so I remember getting on the call and being like, hey, I know one of the conversations was figuring out, like, since I don't technically have my PhD, like, do I have to come in at a lower level, and then once I have that title I can try to apply for a off track promotion or something like that or whatever, or do I have to like wait and try to progress later on? And she was like, no, we're not doing that. Like, I'm hiring you because you have the skills that I need, not because you have the title that is on the job application, right? And it's like,
That's
it was
awesome.
a immediate breath of fresh air of like, oh, this person is like looking out for me, is like, and is like valuing my skills, and not you know the three letters after my name or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And isn't worried about maybe the weird technicalities that would you know help her from a budgetary standpoint, right? Every year of
Hmm.
like, oh, we can bring him at a lower level, right? Instead, she was like, let me take care of my people.
Yeah.
um and I immediately, like, for me that was like the, okay, my walls down, we're cool, right? And so it was really cool to see her have that conversation with me. And then the other team members I interviewed with were just very honest, transparent. You could tell too, like, I laugh at this because a lot of people talk about like work families, and I personally, I think in a lot of scenarios that can be really toxic and a really bad environment, because
Yes.
I love my family, but I do not want my to work with my family. But I wouldn't say that GSSI is that style of family. That instead they really do just care about you as a person first, right? Like, and for a while I was super skeptical. Like, I'd get on these meetings, and your first couple months you're just connecting with everyone from GSSI. We have 5 different locations, so you're hopping on all these Zoom calls, and you're getting to know these people, and you're like, are they actually this nice? Do they actually care this much? And year and a half, 2 years in, like, it's true. Like, they really do. And they look out for you as a person first, and they also approach their work in that way of, I'm here to do good work, but I'm also like not going to define myself by my work. Like, I'm a person that has a job at GSSI. And I will say, like, that was something I didn't feel like academia, you know, excels at. I feel like in academia, you really are your work in a lot of settings if you're not careful. And that's how I was in my PhD. I defined myself by the study I was doing, and the papers I was publishing, and in the journals they were getting published in, and if I got funding or not. And at GSSI, they're very much like who you are as a person, and then let's go to work and do some good stuff, but let's leave it at the door, and make sure we take care of you as people. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing those insights. A lot of what you said resonates with me from the we're a family can be good, but it can also be very toxic.
Yeah.
And the the defining of the work you do defines who you are. I felt that exact same way. And I mean, I think that's how we're trained, right? That's what we do, and that's what it's like. Oh, how are you doing? Oh, let me talk to you about my research. At least that was my friends and family for the longest time. And it's nothing bad. I think it's just the way the system is. It's rolled, I guess, the way the system is. But I do feel like it's changing a little bit from conversations that I've had with other individuals in academia. So, couple of other things before we let you go. So you were talking about, the three letters behind your name. And so briefly looking at the GSSI website, I see that there's, some individuals with masters or different levels of education. Can you tell us, one, kind of a breakdown of how the different roles that are in there? And then to go along with that, you talked about the your skills that you brought in, and you being out and having a lot of applied science experience. Can somebody that doesn't have that, can they come in and still join the team and perhaps do, I don't know, writing, or if they're really good at writing, or talk a little bit about the different opportunities, I guess, that are out for the GSSI?
So GSSI is a very broad reaching organization. I feel like from a what your day-to-day responsibilities can look like, and you also can have an extremely diverse background in these types of positions. Like, to your point of the GSSI website, I have a background in exercise physiology, strength and conditioning, and I have a PhD. But there are a lot of my team members that may have a sports nutrition background and have be a registered dietitian, but not a PhD, or both. There are people that on our team that are biomechanics backgrounds that we're able to kind of shift into the physiology side of things a little bit more. But we essentially have 4 pillars of work that are kind of like blended. Like, I don't just do research, but my main responsibility is research. And that's one of our main pillars is our research team, our team that is dedicated to clinical trials, field-based research, and conducting our own research. We also have an insights and innovation team, which is really centered around this idea of scouring, the external literature to understand what, opportunities there are, what external research can support our products and our work, or give us ideas for future, priorities. And they also substantiate all of our claims. So, whenever you see something on Gatorade, like any claim that's on there, rapid rehydration, or, hydrates better than water, or whatever, that has to be substantiated by our team. And we have team members dedicated to saying, like, is this a valid claim? Does the research align with this claim? And is it solid research? Is it not just, is there a study that said that electrolyte beverages are better than water, but are there multiple clinical trials that are, thorough and well controlled that substantiate this claim? Does it apply to this population? Does it apply, to this beverage volume, or, this scenario, right?
Is it, to interrupt on that, is it similar to, I guess, kind of have like an internal peer review? Is that the kind of the similar process, or how?
I would say,
how does that work?
We do have our own internal peer review process too, and that even goes as far as, proposing research. We propose that internally to a group of experts, and they, make sure that we refine our protocols, and then we conduct them, and then they get reviewed before we take them externally. But our insights and innovation team is kind of doing that for maybe the marketing and the brand side, where the brand comes to them and says, hey, I want to say this. And they go, yes or no, right? Like, does that make sense? Does science agree with what you want to say, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of their big responsibilities. They also are really intentional about gathering insights. So making sure that what we're doing aligns with what the consumer wants, right? So we have an employee down in our lab that is dedicated to doing that with the youth athletes. So we have focus groups where we bring the athletes in and they can test out a product or, tell us what they think of a new design or, a new slogan. What does that mean to them? And we can gather that insights and share that with the company, as well as, sharing that with the research team so that we're all kind of on the same page of what is the actual individual need or think or want, and how does that align with, the science and what we think they need or want, right? And how do we meet that, bridge? So that team is dedicated to a lot of those kind of aspects of the industry. And then we have our education and service group as well. So these are individuals that, are handling a lot of the content development for the GSSI website. They handle a lot of the work for our ACSM lectures and presentations that we give externally. They also we do like a GSSI U professors where we give guest lectures in sports nutrition, hydration, and performance. And they kind of handle a lot of that, educational content, make sure it aligns with our research, external research. And then they also do service testing, which is the fun part of our job. We go out to, professional teams, collegiate teams, and we can provide services like usually sweat testing is our go-to, is like, hey, what is your sweat rate? What is your sweat sodium concentration? And how can we, prepare you better from a hydration perspective to maintain your performance at an optimal level? So that's the fun part where we get to kind of step away from the desk a little bit or the lab and go out into the field and work with these athletes and see that immediate impact, which is cool. And like I said, it's kind of a blend where, I've had the opportunity to go out on these service trips, even though my role is, research based,
I guess one last thing, Phil, if you can just, and you had already mentioned that your role is very dynamic, priorities change and everything. Can you tell the listener, whoever's viewing this podcast, a day in the life of in your role, like, or maybe you can say a week in the life of Phil.
Yeah.
What does it look like?
A week might be better because a day varies a lot. Yeah. There are some days that I'm going out to data collection in the field, and that might be a morning or an afternoon practice for these sports teams. And we're going and collecting, pre-practice body weights and urine samples and sweat rate. And we're bringing it back to the lab. And then, I'm, inputting that data. I'm kind of preparing for the next data collection. There's also days where we do a lot of, early morning data collections in the lab where, some of our clinical trials, they're probably fasted if there's a, nutritional component or a hydration component. And so we're coming in very early in the morning, doing, very controlled research studies, collecting data, getting participants set up. And that data collection is a big part of my day, especially lately. I'd say probably 50% of my day ends up, data collection. And then the rest of my day is, okay, can we get some of these other priorities off your list? For example, writing manuscripts is still very much a part of my job. The good thing is it's not a, main key performance indicator. So at the end of the day, if that paper takes me a year to get out, I'd like to do it faster. But if your priority is get this data collection done, and you have a paper waiting, like it's not going to be like the deciding factor on my, career development, which is nice.
Yeah.
But I do have the opportunity to write still. I would say I have less focused time for it, because
Mhm.
another aspect that I really had to learn to get used to in the industry side of things, and just being at a company where we're at, various different sites from Texas to Chicago to New York to the UK, is the various meetings throughout the day. So some days it's one or two meetings. Some days I have 6-7 hours of meetings, and I'm sitting in meetings all day, and that's a bit of an adjustment. But then, 15% of my role is dedicated or allowed for travel. So when I do service trips, we fly out to these places, spend a couple days, do the testing, come back. We did a research study in the occupational workers, where we spent a week on site at a uh, beverage factory, and monitored heat stress and hydration and ergonomics. And during that time, I wasn't in the lab. I wasn't in the lab, in the office taking meetings. You're dedicated to data collection that whole time. And then, there's a lot of like, clerical portions of like, you're responsible for the recruitment, the logging of all of your participants' data, and making sure it's all in properly documented. And you're often talking to our clinical operations team and making sure that you're following good clinical practice and things like that. So there's a lot of like regulatory portions.
Mhm.
At GSSI IMG, we're unique too, where we're not in a broader Pepsi facility. So we are our own IT people. We are our own, facility management people. So it's a little different than some of the other spaces. But so some days you're not even getting to the science till halfway through, because you're over here trying to figure out, how to get your AC up and running. But no, I'm just kidding. But
Yeah.
luckily, we still can get support there. But we often are just trying to also manage our own site,
Mhm.
because it isn't within a larger Pepsi facility. Um, yeah, so it varies a ton.
Yeah.
And again, that's why the adaptability is so key. You got to capitalize on what you're doing in that moment and when you need to do it. But it I have always, excelled more in those types of roles. If
Mhm.
if my job was just data collection or just writing papers, I think
Yeah.
I would have a harder time, and probably get a little bit more bored. But that's
Absolutely.
daily switch up helps.
Yeah, no, I thank you for going into detail about that. As you said, somebody that might be very used to having structure, everything being the same every day, this might be, even though it's, to us sounds like, oh my gosh, this is awesome, right? Really
Yeah.
cool stuff. To somebody else, it might be very difficult to do,
Yeah.
just because the unstructured structure, I guess, component of
Yeah.
it. But yeah, Joe, any other last questions you might have for Phil?
Yeah, really insightful. And I'm curious now, if there's someone listening that wants to get into a role like yours or
Mhm.
adjacent to yours, what suggestions would you have? And you can speak, I guess, broadly to the general things, so whether they have a master's or a PhD,
Yeah.
but what are the things that they could do to prepare themselves for the interview? Try to
Mhm.
get in contact with the company looking for roles. What can they be doing in the meantime to get themselves to be more competitive?
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that's a really good question. And I always think it's really unique, because part of what I didn't finish with my last answer was probably that, like, the broadness of our roles. I have this applied exercise physiology background, but we have you know, a PhD, uh, an individual with a PhD in chemistry that is our wet lab biochemist, and his day looks very structured, and he is very dedicated to our biochemical analyses. And his background in chemistry really helps support his ability to support our team. And so it's a really broad career path to that could bring you to a GSSI role, right? We have the sports nutrition backgrounds, the exercise physiology backgrounds, the chemistry, the hard sciences. What I would say is, in an industry role like GSSI, make sure you understand the person. Make sure that you understand the population that you're trying to work with, because it's very easy in research to kind of put your blinders up and go, yeah, I know what they want and what they need. Kind of like we were saying with the insights, we gather a lot of insights so that we know, like, what do the athletes and the people actually want and need, and how can that help shift our perspectives, and we can still use science to kind of drive that ship and meet them where they want to be, right? um so I think it's really making sure you understand the population that you'd be working with. So for me, I don't have a strong, background or experience working with athletes in my like PhD work. But I have understood the athlete from being an athlete, from being a strength coach, from being a personal trainer. I worked with a ton of athletes. I was around the athletic realm a lot, but I still had to kind of take a step back in this new role and really understand, youth athletes specifically, and how that differs from collegiate and professional athletes, and really try to learn about that population um, after taking so much time in the occupational space, right? And even in my current role, I'm shifting from military and firefighters to industrial athletes, as we call them, or warehouse workers, meaning physically demanding occupations that are more day to day operations. And that in itself is a whole new population that I've had to learn and develop and understand. Um, so I think it's taking the time to understand that company, what populations they're working with, what their mission is for that population, and seeing how you fit into that equation. I'd say if you don't quite see a perfect fit, that doesn't mean don't try. I didn't quite see a perfect fit whenever I applied, and it's worked out better than I could imagine. I think when you prepare for interviews, one thing that I've always uh, encouraged is, rather than trying to display all your skill sets that are on your resume and CV, that's what someone can read on paper. That's what's going to get you into the interview. What you need to be able to do in the interview is show them the intangibles. And a lot of that comes down to, I feel like, honesty, transparency, and confidence, right? You have to be confident in what you're capable of, but doing so from a realistic perspective too. Like, with that transparency and honesty, I'll go on like a little tangent, but in my interview, one of the things that I think helped me so much, and my boss and I have talked about, is they asked me, "Hey, are you experienced in this?" Which was catapult external load monitoring, wearable data, right? And I was like, no, honestly, I've never used it. I was like, but I have a lot of experience in wearable technology that makes me very confident that I could pick this up uh, fairly quickly. And I think it was that honesty paired with confidence of, maybe I don't know how to do this, and I'm comfortable telling you that, but I'm also going to tell you that I'll figure it out, and I can figure it out. And I think that was a pretty big staple of my interview that kind of helped me get this job. So I always encourage people, like, don't overplay your hand. Just be honest, and make sure that you go in with a confident perspective too, because I know my first couple of interviews I blew because I had no confidence. So it's like, it all worked out. I ended up where I couldn't imagine I'd want to be, and I love it. But I definitely had some interviews that I didn't go in confident, and I knew right away, like, yeah, they're not going to give me a call back. And the last thing I'll say on this tangent is just that I would encourage you to, again, be transparent, but like in your networking and communication too. Like, I was hesitant when I was younger to like try to network and communicate because you're always like, oh, I don't want to be a bother. I don't want to be a bother. But now being in that role, like I love the opportunity to, help that next generation of student. And, um, you know, when people message me on LinkedIn, I try to always take that opportunity to meet with them. Um, and kind of whenever you get a lot of requests when you're in a role like Gatorade Sports Science, where it's a very flashy title, right? We get a lot of requests, and what I've learned to do on filtering them is like, is this person coming from a place of genuine curiosity and interest in learning, or are they here because they very directly are like trying to leverage this for self-interest, right? Like, and that's where I would encourage, like, in a networking standpoint, make sure you come in with an interest in growing your network and, potentially opening yourself to new opportunities. But make sure you want to get to know the person and realize that, just the act of getting to know that person could have a benefit to you and them in a way you don't realize. And it doesn't have to be, hey, how would I get a job at GSSI? Can you recommend me? Can you, it's like, I don't know you, right? So I think it's just being like genuine and building real relationships in our field. Our field is small. And I'm learning that more and more as I've spent years in here, of like the amount of connections that and paths that cross. So if you build genuine relationships, the possibilities are endless.
Yeah, it's a great note to end on with the human connection, small network, being transparent. And I think it goes to show that if someone was to say, hey, can I get that job? You could promote them. But if you don't know anything about the person or what they do every day, you may not like it. Whereas you're the perfect example of, you interviewed and they had a job that was maybe a better fit for you than you even expected. So
yeah,
perfect. Well, Phil, is there anything else that maybe we didn't ask, or anything that you want to share that you haven't already touched upon?
No, honestly, I would just like to thank you both for the opportunity to be on here and to get to chat. Like I said, I love the opportunity to share, my career experience, because I feel like it was unique and unexpected, and I, had no plan of being here. So I always love to share it and show people the opportunity that exists. So thank you for the platform.
Yeah, no, well, thank you for sharing. I'm sure those listening to the podcast will also be appreciative of your insights. And we appreciate you if you're still listening. Remember to always keep asking questions and stay curious, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Awesome.